out on the razor's edge of explored space, where the light of civilization is just a bitter memory, a man can lose everything: his fortune, his hope, his name. Elias Vance was that man, a prospector, haunted by ghosts sifting through the dust of dead moons. He was looking for rocks worth a few credits, but what he found was a life. A girl with no shoes, no name, and eyes that held the terror of a fallen star. He offered her shelter, a kindness he thought he'd long forgotten. He never imagined that a simple act, a warm bath, would wash away her silence and reveal a secret etched into her very skin, a truth that could shatter empires and break the heart of a broken man. The silence of Praxos Fermf was a physical thing. It pressed in on the helmet of Elias Vance's environmental suit, a crushing weight broken only by the rasp of his own breathing and the crunch of metallic dust under his heavy boots. For 3 standard weeks, he'd been chasing a ghost, a faint, anomalous energy signature his deep-range scanner had picked up. It was probably just a mineral echo, a trick of the moon's iron-rich geology. It always was. But hope, even the threadbare, cynical kind Elias clung to, was a hard thing to kill. Elias was a prospector, which was a polite way of saying he was a scavenger of the galactic fringe. He piloted a beat-to-hell freighter, the Vagrant, a ship that much like its captain had seen better decades. He worked claims no respectable corporation would touch, sifting through the cosmic debris left behind by forgotten wars and failed colonies. It was a lonely life, a penance of his own design. The silence out here was better than the phantom echoes of a child's laughter or the memory of his wife Sarah's hand in his. Some ghosts you could outrun by jumping to the next system. Others were welded to your soul. The anomaly was stronger now, pulling him toward a jagged canyon, carved by a meteor millions of years ago. His handheld scanner beeped insistently, the pitch rising. It wasn't ore. This was refined metal, manufactured, and recent. He crested a ridge of rust-colored rock, and his breath hitched. It wasn't a ghost. It was a tomb. Wedged deep in the canyon was a small, sleek vessel, unlike any design he recognized from the Galactic Compact. Its hull, a composite of pearlescent white and dark matte gray, was fractured and scorched. An escape pod, a high-end one. The emergency beacon was dead, its power source likely fried on impact. He approached cautiously, his pulse rifle held at a low ready. The fringe was thick with pirate slavers and things far worse. A trap was just as likely as a rescue. The pod's entry hatch was partially sheared off. He peered into the darkness, his helmet lamps cutting a stark white path. The interior was a wreck of shattered consoles and trailing wires. There was only one crash couch, its safety webbing torn. It was empty. A smear of dark, purplish liquid stained the bulkhead. Alien blood. "Hello," he called out, his voice tinny in the suit's comms. Only the wind, thin and cold on this airless rock, answered. He ran a diagnostic. Life signs. Negative. Of course. Still something nagged at him. He followed the drag marks leading away from the pod. They were shallow, scuffed, as if made by someone barely able to walk. They led to a small cave, a dark maw in the canyon wall. Elias hesitated. Standard procedure was to call it in, log the wreck and move on. Let the authorities handle it. But what authority? Out here the only law was who had the bigger ship and the faster trigger finger. And if someone survived this, they were alone. Just like him. The thought resonated with a painful clang in the empty chambers of his heart. He entered the cave, his light sweeping across the bare rock. And then he saw her. She was huddled in the deepest recess, small and impossibly still. A girl. She couldn't have been much older than his own daughter Lily would have been. Her hair was a cascade of silver white, caked with grime and dust. Her skin was a pale, almost luminous grey, smudged with dirt and the same purple blood from the pod. She wore a simple tattered tunic of a dark blue fabric. Her feet were bare, scraped and bruised, but it was her eyes that seized him. They were wide, a startling shade of violet, and they were fixed on him with a terror so profound it felt like a physical blow. She wasn't breathing. He saw the subtle rise and fall of her chest had ceased. She was holding her breath, trying to will herself, invisible, a tactic of a terrified child. Slowly, carefully, Elias lowered his rifle, letting it hang from its magnetic clamp on his thigh. He raised his hands, palms open, a universal gesture of peace he hoped she'd understand. "It's okay," he said, his voice deliberately soft. "I'm not going to hurt you." She flinched at the sound, pressing herself harder against the rock wall. A low, guttural growl like that of a cornered animal vibrated in her chest. He took a step back, giving her space. He keyed his suit's comms to external broadcast, a gentler, uncanned sound. "My name is Elias. I'm a friend." He didn't know if she could understand him, but the tone might translate. He knelt down, making himself smaller, less of a threat. "You're safe now." For a long moment, she just stared, her violet eyes tracking his every microscopic movement. He could see the exhaustion warring with the fear. Her thin frame trembled, not from the cold, her species was clearly adapted to it, but from shock and adrenaline. Finally, a ragged breath escaped her lips in a shuddering gasp. Then another. He had no idea who she was, where she came from, or what horrors she had fled. He only knew one thing. He couldn't leave her here to die. The ghost of his daughter wouldn't allow it. "Come on," he whispered, extending a gloved hand. "Let's get you out of the cold." She didn't take his hand, but as he slowly stood and turned to walk back toward the light, he heard the faint scuff of bare feet on rock behind him. She was following. The journey back to the vagrant was a silent, tense affair. The alien girl walked a careful 10 feet behind him, her movements fluid and wary, like a wild deer ready to bolt at the slightest provocation. When the ship's ramp lowered with a hydraulic hiss, she froze, her violet eyes wide with alarm. "It's okay," Elias said, turning to face her. He pointed to the ship. "This is my home. It's safe, warm." He walked up the ramp, leaving it open for her. He didn't look back, knowing that watching her would only increase her fear. He moved into the small common area, a space that served as his kitchen, living room, and workshop, and began stripping off his bulky EVA suit. The ship's recycled air, smelling faintly of ozone and old coffee, was a welcome relief. He left the helmet on until the girl was aboard, not wanting to spook her with his unveiled human face. He heard her footsteps, light and hesitant, on the metal grating of the ramp. She stopped at the threshold, a silhouette against the harsh alien landscape. Elias busied himself at the nutrient dispenser, pretending to be occupied. He punched in a code for a warm protein broth, a bland but nourishing meal. The ship's main door cycled shut, sealing them inside. The girl flinched violently at the sound, letting out a small, choked gasp. He turned and saw she had her back pressed against the inner door, her knuckles white where she gripped the folds of her tunic. Elias removed his helmet, running a hand through his thinning brown hair. He had a plain, tired face, etched with the lines of grief and solitude. He gave her what he hoped was a reassuring smile. "See just me." "Elias." He placed the steaming mug of broth on the small table between them and backed away, giving her a wide berth. "For you," he said, gesturing to the mug. "It's food. Good." She stared at the mug, then at him. Her gaze was sharp, intelligent. She was assessing him, weighing threat against desperation. Slowly, inch by inch, she slid along the wall until she reached the table. She didn't sit. She snatched the mug with a speed that startled him, her movements economical and precise. She retreated back to the door, cradling the warmth of the mug, but she didn't drink. She watched him, her eyes narrowed. This was going to be harder than he thought. The first 48 hours were a dance of distance and silence. She refused to speak, or perhaps couldn't. She wouldn't take the spare bunk in the tiny crew quarters, choosing instead to create a small nest for herself in a cargo alcove, pulling spare thermal blankets around her. She ate what he gave her, but only after he had moved to the other side of the ship. She watched everything her head, tilting with curiosity at the ship's systems, the star charts projected on the main view screen, the way he tinkered with a faulty servo arm. Elias decided to call her Willow. Her silver hair and the graceful, almost fragile way she moved reminded him of the weeping willows that had grown near his childhood home. It was better than the girl. It gave her a sliver of identity, even if it was one he'd imposed. He tried to communicate using gestures and simple words. He pointed to himself. Elias. He pointed to the nutrient dispenser. Food. The engine console. Ship. She would watch her expression unreadable, and then look away, offering nothing in return. Her silence was a fortress, and he had no idea how to breach its walls. The first crack appeared on the third day. Elias was running a diagnostic on the Vagrant's FTL drive, a task that required him to splice a series of incredibly fine fiber-optic cables. His hands, calloused and clumsy from years of mining, were struggling with the delicate work. He swore under his breath as a cable slipped from his magnetic tweezers for the third time. He felt a presence beside him. Willow was standing there, her violet eyes fixed on the tangled mess of fibers in his hand. Before he could react, she reached out. Her fingers were long and impossibly slender, with an extra joint that allowed them to bend with unnerving dexterity. With a series of movements too quick for him to follow, she took the tweezers and the cables from him. In seconds, she had not only spliced the broken connection, but had rethreaded and secured two others that were showing signs of wear. She placed the tool back on the console and retreated to her corner without a sound. Elias stared at the perfectly repaired connection, stunned. It was work that would have taken a master shipwright with specialized tools an hour to complete. She had done it in less than a minute with her bare hands. "Thank you," he said, his voice filled with genuine awe. That was amazing. For the first time, she met his gaze and held it for more than a second. There was a flicker of something in those violet depths, not trust, not yet, but maybe acknowledgement. A tiny seed of connection had been planted in the barren soil of their silence. Later that evening, he was reviewing star charts, plotting a course to a trading outpost on Casino Wharf, where he could sell his meager findings and, more importantly, ask some discreet questions about a girl with silver hair and violet eyes. He felt a light touch on his arm. He turned. Willow was holding out a small, flat piece of metal she must have scavenged from his scrap pile. On its surface, she had scratched a picture with a sharpened bit of wire. It was a crude but unmistakable drawing of a star system, a large central star with 7 planets. She pointed to the 4th planet, then tapped her own chest. Elias's heart pounded. This was it. This was communication. "This is your home?" he asked, pointing to the drawing. "Your world." She nodded slowly, her eyes searching his face. Then her expression changed. The light in her eyes dimmed, replaced by a profound, soul-deep sadness. With one finger, she drew a single jagged line through the entire drawing, scratching it out with a vehemence that was startling. She dropped the piece of metal which clattered to the deck and fled back to her nest of blankets, pulling one over her head like a shroud. Elias picked up the metal shard. Home. A home that was for some reason gone, crossed out, destroyed. He looked over at the trembling lump of blankets in the cargo alcove. The fortress of her silence wasn't empty. It was a prison built to keep an unspeakable sorrow contained, and he was beginning to realize that the girl he had saved was not just a refugee. She was the survivor of an apocalypse. 5 days aboard the Vagrant had seen a subtle but significant shift. Willow no longer flinched every time he moved. She would occasionally sit at the table while he ate, though she still kept her silence. The grime from the crash still clung to her, matting her silver hair and streaking her pale skin. She was clean enough, having used sanitizing wipes he'd given her, but she carried the dust of Praxos 5 on her like a second skin. Elias knew it was a delicate subject. Intimacy and vulnerability were tied up in the act of bathing, and he didn't want to push her and shatter the fragile trust they'd built. But basic hygiene was also a matter of health. He approached it carefully one evening. "Willow," he began, his tone gentle. "There's a sonic shower in the fresher. It uses water. It's warm. It can help you get clean." He pantomimed, washing his face and hair. "It feels good." She looked at her own dirt-streaked hands, then back at him. A complex series of emotions played across her face, apprehension, curiosity, and a deep, gut-wrenching fear that he didn't understand. She gave a short, almost imperceptible nod. He showed her to the fresher, a small utilitarian compartment. He demonstrated how to activate the shower, a simple, glowing panel. "You press here. Water comes from here," he said, pointing to the nozzle. "It will automatically cycle off after 5 minutes. There are towels here. Take your time. I'll be in the cockpit." He left, closing the door behind him, giving her privacy. He settled into his pilot's chair, trying to focus on calibrating the ship's navigation, but his ears were strained, listening for any sign of distress. He heard the faint hiss as the shower activated. A sense of relief washed over him. It was a small step, but it felt like a monumental leap toward normalcy. The scream shattered the quiet hum of the ship. It wasn't a sound of fear or surprise. It was a raw, visceral shriek of pure, undiluted agony and horror. It clawed at the air, sharp and broken, followed by the sound of something or someone collapsing against the fresher wall. Elias was on his feet in a second, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Willow." He pounded on the door. "Willow, are you okay?" Only a choked, guttural sobbing answered him. It was the sound of a soul being ripped apart. He didn't hesitate. He hit the emergency override, and the door slid open with a pneumatic whoosh. The scene that met his eyes would be burned into his memory forever. Willow was slumped on the floor of the shower, the warm water still cascading over her. She was on her hands and knees, her body convulsing with violent, silent sobs, her head bowed as if under an immense weight. But that wasn't what made Elias's blood run cold. It was her skin. Where once it had been a smooth, pale grey, it was now a living canvas of light. Intricate geometric patterns bloomed across her back, her arms, her legs, everywhere the water touched. They glowed with a soft blue-white luminescence, like tattoos made of starlight. They were beautiful, breathtakingly so, forming complex chains of symbols, elegant swirls and sharp, crystalline lines. But to Willow they were a source of unspeakable torment. She was clawing at her own arms, her slender fingers trying to scrape the glowing marks from her flesh, her whimpers filled with self-loathing. "No, no, 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 no," she whispered the first words he had ever heard her speak. They were a hoarse, desperate litany of denial. "Not again. Please, make it stop." Elias rushed forward, oblivious to the water soaking his clothes. He knelt in front of her, grabbing her hands, gently but firmly, to stop her from hurting herself. "Willow, hey, look at me. It's okay. It's just me." She looked up, and the sight of her face broke him. Her violet eyes, wide with a horror that transcended sanity, were not looking at him, but through him. She was seeing something else, some memory replayed in hideous detail. Tears streamed down her face, mingling with the shower water. "They're all dead," she gasped, her voice ragged. "I can see them. Everyone. The worlds, the dust, the screaming." Her body went rigid. Her eyes rolled back in her head, and she collapsed against him, her body limp, the only sign of life, the shallow, stuttering breaths she took. The glowing patterns on her skin pulsed in time with her frantic, failing heart. Elias held her, his mind reeling. He quickly shut off the water. As her skin began to dry, the luminous markings slowly, mercifully faded, sinking back beneath the surface of her skin, until she was once again a blank grey canvas. He gently wrapped her in the driest towels he could find and carried her out of the fresher. She was light, almost weightless in his arms. He laid her down in her nest of blankets, her body still trembling with the aftershocks of her trauma. He sat beside her for hours, watching the slow, rhythmic rise and fall of her chest, his mind racing. Who was this girl? What in God's name had been done to her? Those weren't tattoos. They were something else. A brand, a record, a scar that only water could reveal. He thought he had found a refugee, a simple survivor. He was wrong. He had found a living monument to an atrocity, and her hidden past had just broken her wide open in the hold of his ship. For 2 days, Willow, or whatever her real name was, remained locked in a catatonic state. She didn't eat or drink. She lay curled in her nest, her eyes open, but unseeing her body, occasionally racked with silent tremors. Elias did what he could. He sat with her, talking in a low, calm voice, telling her stories about his childhood, about the farm where he grew up, about anything that was gentle and normal. He used a damp cloth to moisten her lips and gently cleaned her face, carefully, avoiding using enough water to trigger the horrifying transformation again. On the 3rd day since the shower, he was sitting beside her, telling her about his daughter Lily and how she used to love looking at the constellations. She always wanted to see the Centauri cluster. He murmured more to himself than to her. Said the pictures looked like scattered diamonds on black velvet. A flicker of movement. The girl's eyes focused on him. Her voice, when it came, was a dry, rasping whisper. "Lyra." Elias stopped, his heart skipping a beat. "What? My name?" She whispered, her gaze holding his. "It is Lyra." The relief was so potent it almost brought him to his knees. "Lyra." He repeated the name, feeling right solid. "It's good to finally meet you, Lyra." A single tear traced a path down her cheek. "You showed me kindness," she said, her speech halting as if the words were foreign objects in her mouth. "No one has shown me kindness in a long time." Over the next few hours, coaxed by sips of water and warm broth, the story came out. It wasn't a flood, but a slow, painful trickle of words, dredged up from a well of trauma, so deep Elias could barely comprehend it. Her people were called the Sylvans. They were a gentle symbiotic race from a world of immense sentient forests. They were artists, empaths, and cultivators with a unique biological trait. Their skin was a living record. Every significant memory, every deep emotional connection would manifest as a faint bioluminescent pattern, a loom visible only to other Sylvans in moments of shared intimacy. It was their way of sharing their lives, their histories, their love. Then the Cathar Syndicate had come. Elias knew the name. The Cathar were a brutal, militaristic conglomerate that operated on the lawless edges of the galaxy. They were slavers, conquerors, and strip miners, infamous for their efficiency and their utter lack of mercy. The Cathar hadn't just conquered her people, they had perverted the most sacred part of their being. They discovered that the Sylvan's unique biology could be manipulated. Using brutal psychoinductive conditioning and chemical agents, they turned the Sylvan's skin into a weapon. They forced them to become witnesses, living recorders for their campaign of galactic cleansing. They took us from our world. Lyra whispered, her eyes fixed on the grey metal bulkhead, seeing a past he could only imagine. They chained us to the bridges of their world burners, their extermination fleets. Her voice trembled thick with a horror that was still fresh. Our eyes were clamped open. We were forced to watch. They would descend on a world, a non-compliant colony, or a primitive species that was in their way. They would deploy the atmospheric incinerators. They would unleash the flesh phages. We watched worlds burn. We heard the psychic death screams of billions. And our skin remembered. Elias felt sick. The markings, he breathed, understanding, dawning like a black sun. When I saw them in the shower, the water acts as a catalyst. She explained, her voice devoid of emotion now, as if she had walled herself away from the pain. It activates the Cathar's chemical brand, making the record visible to all. Each symbol that you saw, each line, is a world, a tombstone. The larger, more complex glyphs are for high-population worlds. The smaller ones, outposts, fledgling colonies. The Syndicate calls it the Codex, a perfect, undeniable record of their conquests. A trophy. She finally looked at him, her violet eyes swimming with an agony so profound it was almost physical. They didn't just make us watch. They made us the ledger for their genocide. Our most beautiful, intimate gift, our ability to share our souls, they twisted it into a monument of their hate. That's why I screamed. When the water touched me, I didn't just see the marks. I relived it. All of it. Every death. Every scream. A billion ghosts crying out in my mind. Elias was speechless. He was just a prospector. A man who thought he knew the darkness of the galaxy. He knew of piracy, of claim jumping, of corporate wars. This was different. This was an evil on a cosmic scale, a methodical, industrial-grade cruelty that defied imagination. "How did you escape?" he finally managed to ask. "A raid," she said. "A rival faction attacked the flagship I was on, the Absolution. In the chaos, the containment field on my cell failed. I found an escape pod. I just ran." She wrapped her arms around herself. "The Cathar do not lose their property. They will be hunting me." Elias's mind spun. This was so much bigger than him. He was harboring not just a fugitive, but a living record of war crimes that could destabilize entire sectors. If the Galactic Compact knew about this, it could trigger a war. If the Cathar found them, they wouldn't just kill him. They would disassemble his ship atom by atom for the crime of helping her. He looked at Lyra, curled up and broken, yet possessing a strength he couldn't fathom. She had endured the unendurable. He thought of his own loss, the grief for his wife and daughter that had driven him to the edge of the universe. His pain, as vast as it felt, was a flickering candle next to the inferno of hers. They tattooed the names of the dead on the souls of the living, Elias said softly, the words tasting like ash. Lyra nodded, a fresh wave of tears spilling. "They left me alive," she choked out, "but they made sure I could never forget why." He had a choice. He could take her to the nearest compact station, hand her over to the authorities, and wash his hands of it. It would be the smart, sensible thing to do, or he could do the right thing. He thought of the ghosts of his family. He thought of the man he used to be, the man Sarah and Lily had loved. That man wouldn't run. That man would protect the innocent. He reached out and for the first time placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. She flinched but didn't pull away. "Your name is Lyra," he said, his voice firm, resolute. "You are Sylvan. You are not their trophy. Not anymore. I won't let them take you." In that moment, in the belly of a rusty freighter, drifting through the void, a lonely prospector declared war on an empire. Executor Kalin stood on the bridge of the Cathar strike cruiser Retribution. The ship was a blade of obsidian and malevolent crimson light, designed for one purpose: intimidation and subjugation. Kalin, like his ship, was an instrument of his master's will. Tall and lean, clad in black articulated armor, his face was a mask of cold aristocratic disdain. His species, the Cathar, were humanoid, but with skin the color of polished slate and eyes that glowed with a faint, predatory red light. "Report!" he commanded, his voice, a low baritone that cut through the bridge's sterile hum. The tactical officer, a hulking Cathar brute named Grawn, turned from his console. "Executor, we have cross-referenced the debris from the raid with the Absolution's logs. One asset is unaccounted for. Designation Codex Unit 734. Kalin's expression didn't change, but a dangerous stillness settled over him. Unit 734. The prime unit. The one that had recorded the cleansing of the Cygnus expansion. A priceless artifact. An intolerable loss. The escape pod's trajectory, Kalin asked. Calculated, Executor. It was a blind jump, but its last known vector puts it somewhere within the Praxos system. A worthless cluster of dead rocks on the edge of the fringe. Grawn sneered. The unit will have expired. Its life support would have failed in hours. You will assume nothing, Kalin snapped his voice, dropping to a near-silent threat. The Sylvans are resilient. The Syndicate does not tolerate loose ends or misplaced assets. Scan the system. Every asteroid, every moonlet. I want to see the wreckage of that pod with my own eyes. At once, Executor. For 3 days, the Retribution sliced through the Praxos system, its powerful sensors peeling back the layers of rock and radiation. Kalin was a patient hunter. He had tracked far more elusive prey across the galaxy. A lone, terrified Sylvan was a triviality, but the principle was everything. The Syndicate's power was built on absolute control. Unit 734 represented a crack in that control, and he was here to seal it. On the 4th day, Grawn's voice crackled with triumph. Executor, we have found it. The wreckage of the pod on Praxos Oif. Kalin strode over to the main view screen. A high-resolution image appeared, showing the shattered pod wedged in a canyon. Life signs. Negative, Executor. The pod is cold. And the asset? No biological residue detected outside the pod except for trace amounts inside. It likely died on impact or shortly after. Kalin stared at the image, his glowing red eyes narrowed in concentration. It was too simple, too clean. Zoom in on the ground surrounding the wreck. Enhance for footfalls, non-native patterns. The image sharpened. For a moment, there was nothing but rock and dust. Then the computer highlighted them, faint, almost invisible impressions in the metallic soil. 2 sets, one small and barefoot, the other larger, heavier, the distinct tread of a standard-issue prospector's environmental suit. Someone was here, Grawn growled. A scavenger. Not a scavenger. Kalin corrected, a thin, cruel smile touching his lips for the first time. A rescuer. The asset is alive. It has help. He turned to the comms officer. Scan all ship registries and flight logs originating from this sector in the last 2 weeks. Cross-reference with known vessels belonging to independent prospectors. I want a name. I want a destination. and I want a ship to hunt." Meanwhile, aboard the Vagrant, an uneasy peace had settled. Lyra was talking more, eating more. The haunted look in her eyes had not vanished, but it had receded, replaced by a guarded watchfulness. She had taken to helping Elias with ship maintenance, her nimble fingers and innate understanding of complex systems proving invaluable. She seemed to find comfort in the work, in the tangible reality of fixing what was broken. Elias was charting a new course. Cassinithor was too predictable, too close. He needed to get deeper into the unclaimed territories, to a place where even the Cathar would hesitate to look. He was plotting a complex route through a dense asteroid field known as the Serpent's Coil, a graveyard for ships with less than perfect navigators. He was running a routine diagnostic on his comms system when a small yellow flag popped up on his screen. It was an alert he hadn't seen in years. "What is it?" Lyra asked, noticing the sudden tension in his shoulders. "It's a ping," Elias said, his mouth dry. "A system query. When I logged the claim on Praxos 4, I had to register my ship's transponder ID with the sector's public database. It's standard procedure." A query from who? Elias typed a command, tracing the signal's origin. The result made his blood freeze. The query wasn't from a public server or a corporate entity. It was a high-priority encrypted signal originating from a Cathar military frequency. They knew. "They're coming," he said, his voice grim. He slammed his fist on the console. "Stupid, I was so focused on you I forgot basic security. Leaving a digital footprint." Lyra came to stand beside him, her small hand hovering near his shoulder. "They were always coming, Elias. You didn't do anything wrong. You gave me time. You gave me a chance." He looked at her, at the quiet resolve that was starting to bloom beneath the fear. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She was a survivor. "Get to the nav computer." He ordered, his mind kicking into high gear. The lonely, grieving prospector was gone, replaced by a man with something to protect. "Plot the fastest course to the Serpent's Coil. Forget safety protocols. Redline the engines if you have to. We need to disappear." As Lyra's fingers flew across the console, a new alert flashed on the screen. Proximity warning. A massive object had just dropped out of FTL at the edge of the system. It was moving fast. Its transponder was broadcasting an identification code that made the simple query ping feel like a gentle knock on the door. This was the battering ram, KTS Retribution. The hunter's shadow had fallen over them, and the hunt had begun. The Retribution was a predator on the main view screen, a distant but rapidly growing speck of malevolent light. The Vagrant's long-range sensors screamed alarms, blaring a frantic, high-pitched rhythm that echoed Elias's own frantic heartbeat. "They're hailing us," Lyra said, her voice taut. A text window blinked on screen, the Cathar script a series of harsh, angular characters. Elias didn't need the translator to know what it said. "Surrender the asset and you will be spared." "Lying bastards!" Elias snarled, shoving the throttle forward. The Vagrant's engines roared in protest, the old ship shuddering as it accelerated past its recommended safety limits. "Strap yourself in. This is going to get rough." He was no fighter pilot. The Vagrant was a freighter, a beast of burden, not a warship. It had minimal shielding and a pair of forward-facing plasma cutters designed for busting asteroids, not dueling with a strike cruiser. Their only hope was speed and cunning. "The Serpent's Coil is our only shot," he said, his knuckles white on the controls. "If we can make it into the asteroid field, their long-range weapons will be useless. They'll have to follow us in." "Their ship is faster," Lyra stated, her eyes darting between the tactical display and the view screen. "They will intercept us in 17 minutes. We will not make it." It was a simple, brutal calculation. He was outmatched, outgunned, and running out of time. Despair, cold and familiar, began to seep into the edges of his resolve. For a moment, he saw it all ending here, his ship turned to molten slag. Lyra dragged back to her tormentors, his pathetic act of defiance, ending as nothing more than a footnote in her tragic story. There might be another way, Lyra said, suddenly, her voice dropping to a whisper. A secret. Elias glanced at her. She had her eyes closed, her brow furrowed in concentration. What are you talking about? The Codex. She said, her eyes snapping open. They held a new light, not of fear, but of fierce, desperate intensity. The Cathar believe it is only a record, a trophy. They are arrogant. They misunderstood what they stole. It is more than that. It is also a key. She unsealed the front of her tunic, exposing the pale grey skin of her collarbone and shoulders. She took a deep breath. The ship's water recycler. Can you divert a small amount? A fine mist. Confused but trusting her, Elias toggled a control. A nozzle from the fire suppression system hissed, releasing a gentle spray of vapor into the cockpit. As the moisture touched Lyra's skin, the patterns began to emerge, glowing with their ethereal blue light. But these were different from the horrific catalogue on her back and arms. These were finer, more intricate, arranged in a perfect spiraling pattern around her throat and across her chest, like a celestial necklace. The Cathar branding only covers 90% of our bodies, she explained, her voice trembling slightly as the familiar glow returned. They left this part untouched, thinking it insignificant. But this is ours. This is the Sylvan Archive, the path to the Chantry. The Chantry. A hidden world, a sanctuary our ancestors created millennia ago, shielded from all forms of detection. The coordinates are not stored in a computer. They are woven into our very being. This is the star chart. The path home. Elias stared, mesmerized. It wasn't just a map. It was a breathtakingly complex astrogation chart with stellar drift gravitational wells and jump point calculations encoded in the flowing, glowing lines. "Can you use it?" he asked, his voice filled with a hope he hadn't felt moments before. The FTL drive on the Vagrant, it allows for manual coordinate input. Yes, it does, but it's dangerous. A miscalculation of a single decimal point could jump us into the heart of a star. "It is a risk I must take," she said. She leaned over the nav computer, the glowing patterns on her skin reflecting in the dark screen. Her slender fingers began to dance across the keypad, translating the ancient living map into the cold, hard language of the ship's computer. The FTL drive began to whine, spooling up for a jump it wasn't prepared to make. "They're launching fighters," Elias yelled. Two smaller, wasp-like ships detached from the Retribution, streaking toward them. "I need more time," Lyra cried, her fingers a blur. "The final sequence is complex. This was it, the final choice." He could continue his mad dash for the asteroid field, a plan that was almost certain to fail, or he could buy her the time she needed. He could give her a chance to get home. He looked at her bent over the console, her face illuminated by the light of her own history, a beacon of defiance in the dark. He thought of Sarah and Lily. He hadn't been able to save them from the senseless violence of the galaxy. But maybe, just maybe, he could save this girl. He could make one last stand that mattered. "All right, Willow," he said, a grim smile on his face as he used the name he'd first given her. "You get us home. I'll handle the welcoming party." He yanked the control yoke hard to port, turning the Vagrant not away from the fighters, but directly towards them. The ship groaned in protest. "Elias, what are you doing?" Lyra shouted, her head snapping up from the console. "My job," he replied, his eyes fixed on the approaching fighters. I'm a prospector. Time to break some rocks. He rerouted all available power from the rear shields to the forward plasma cutters. The weapon systems designed for mining glowed a searing orange. He wasn't a soldier, and this wasn't a warship, but he was a human being who had been pushed too far. He was a father who had lost a daughter, and these monsters were not going to take another child from him. Not today. The vagrant charged forward, a rusty, defiant fist aimed at the heart of the Cathar Syndicate. The Cathar fighters were slivers of weaponized obsidian, closing the distance with a speed that made the vagrant feel like it was anchored in space. On the tactical display, 2 red triangles swarmed Elias's lone green square, their weapon lock indicators blinking with impatient fury. "They're achieving weapons lock." Lyra's voice was strained, a thin thread of sound against the symphony of alarms now screaming through the cockpit. Her own face was a mask of intense concentration, her eyes darting between the nav computer and the glowing living map that had bloomed across her skin. The light of the Sylvan archive pulsed a frantic, accelerated heartbeat, mirroring the chaos around them. Elias's own heart was a cold, steady drum in his chest. Fear was a passenger, but he wasn't letting it take the controls. He was a prospector. He didn't think like a fighter pilot. He thought in terms of mass velocity and stress fractures. These pilots expected him to run or surrender. He would do neither. Almost there. He muttered his hands, moving with a sureness that surprised him. He watched the fighters' trajectories, saw how they were positioning themselves for a pincer attack, a textbook maneuver. Arrogant. "Just a little closer, you bastards." He glanced at Lyra. Her fingers were a blur on the console, translating starlight and memory into the cold logic of FTL coordinates. He had to buy her more than just seconds. He had to buy her a miracle. "Now!" he roared, slamming his palm down on a large greasy button on the console labeled Emergency Cargo Jettison. With a percussive thump that shuddered through the entire ship, the vagrant's ventral cargo bay doors blew open. Weeks' worth of unrefined high-density ore, jagged chunks of nickel iron, some as small as a fist, others as large as his pilot's chair, spewed into the void. It wasn't just a jettison. It was a shotgun blast of raw planetary mass, perfectly timed to intersect the lead fighter's path. The Cathar pilot had no time to react. He flew directly into the makeshift minefield. His shields, designed for energy weapons, flared a brilliant epileptic white as they were overwhelmed by 1,000 kinetic impacts. The sound of metal torturing metal traveled through the thin vacuum. The fighter's canopy shattered, its sleek black hull was perforated and shredded, and it began to tumble end over end, a dead thing trailing frozen atmosphere. "One down," Elias gritted out, yanking the control yoke. The second pilot was better. He broke off his attack, run his fighter dancing through the thinning debris cloud with contemptuous ease. But he was angry now. This wasn't a clean-up anymore. It was personal. He swung around, his plasma cannons glowing with vengeful heat. A volley of crimson bolts stitched across the vagrant's stern. The ship screamed. Lights flickered violently as a power conduit blew somewhere in the aft section, showering the corridor behind the cockpit in a fountain of sparks. The smell of ozone and burnt wiring filled the air. "Rear shields are gone!" Lyra cried out, her body jolting with the impact. "Hull integrity is at 60% and falling." "Just keep working," Elias yelled back, wrestling with the controls. He rerouted the last of his power reserves, not to the failing shields, but to the forward plasma cutters. The weapon systems whined, the emitters glowing a searing, unstable orange. The Cathar fighter was coming at them head-on, a final lethal pass. On the main view screen, the retribution had grown alarmingly, a mountain of black steel preparing to erase them from existence. A launch tube door was opening on its dorsal spine. A ship killer. Elias, they're firing a torpedo. I see it. He ignored the sophisticated targeting computer, which was frantically trying and failing to lock onto the nimble fighter. He overrode it, aiming manually. He wasn't aiming at the ship. He was aiming where it was going to be. He was leading the target just like he used to do when shooting clay pigeons with his father a lifetime ago. He fired. A thick, incandescent beam of molten energy, wide and clumsy, erupted from the vagrant's bow. The Cathar pilot jinked left, easily dodging the core of the beam. But Elias hadn't been aiming for a clean hit. The plasma cutter's beam was designed to create a wide cone of extreme heat to fracture rock. The fighter's entire port wing clipped the outer edge of this energy field. It didn't explode. It simply ceased to be. Metal wires and weapon systems instantly vaporized, turning the elegant wing into a molten stump. The fighter spun out of control, careening past them into the black. "Coordinates entered!" Lyra screamed, her voice breaking with triumph and terror. "FTL drive is spooled. We can jump now." Elias, jump. The torpedo was a fiery star on the view screen, closing impossibly fast. He could feel the heat of its engines on the ship's hull. This was it. The end of the line or the beginning of a new one. "Punch it!" he roared. He slammed his hand on the FTL activator. The universe outside the cockpit did not just smear. It shattered. It was ripped apart, inverted, and poured through a needle's eye of pure, blinding light. The vagrant, never designed for such a violent, unplotted jump, groaned like a dying beast. The sound wasn't just in the air. It was in his bones, in his teeth, the shriek of every plate, rivet, and beam being pushed past the breaking point. Elias felt a crushing weight press him into his chair, as reality itself became undone. Then, with a final gut-wrenching lurch, the chaos ceased. Silence. A profound, deafening silence broken only by the frantic hiss of a ruptured coolant line and the faint electrical pop of dying systems. The alarms were dead. Half the lights were out. But they were breathing. They were whole. Elias blinked his vision, swimming back into focus. The view screen was no longer blackness and predators. It was filled with a soft, impossible turquoise light emanating from a swirling, majestic nebula that seemed to hum with a gentle, silent music. Did it work?" he asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. The adrenaline was leaving him, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. Lyra was unstrapped from her seat, her hands pressed against the cold glass of the view screen. The patterns on her skin were no longer pulsing with fear, but glowing with a steady, serene luminescence that resonated with the light from the nebula. Tears streamed unchecked down her face, catching the turquoise glow. "This is the veil," she whispered, her voice filled with a reverence so deep it was almost painful. "Our ancestors wove it from light and gravity. The chantry. It's inside." Her breath hitched in a sob that was half joy, half disbelief. We're home." As she spoke, the cosmic dust and glowing gas before them began to shift. It wasn't a mechanical opening, but an organic one, as if the nebula itself was sighing, parting its curtains to welcome them. A tunnel of shimmering, iridescent light formed, leading into the heart of the cloud. And with it came a sensation, not a sound, but a feeling that bloomed directly in Elias's mind. It was a chorus of warmth, of welcome, of relief. It felt like 1,000 gentle hands on his soul whispering, "You are safe. The lost child is returned." He eased the battered vagrant forward, guiding it into the light. As they passed through the veil, the nebula's exterior faded, revealing the sanctuary it had hidden for millennia. A planet vibrant with shades of green and blue he had never seen hung in the soft light, its continents covered in sentient forests that seemed to breathe. orbiting this world were not space stations, but dozens of structures that looked like crystal flowers or spiraling nautilus shells, glowing with their own soft internal light. "They're here," Lyra breathed, pointing with a trembling finger. "Others. There are others. They survived." One of the bioluminescent vessels detached from its orbit and glided towards them, its movements fluid and graceful. It pulsed with a soft golden light, and Elias felt that psychic touch again, clearer this time. A mind ancient and kind brushed against his, showing him images of gratitude, of a debt that could never be repaid. He looked at Lyra. The barefoot, terrified, nameless girl from the cave was gone. In her place stood a woman, bathed in the light of her home, the horrific codex on her skin, finally dormant, a healed-over scar overshadowed by the gentle, living light of her heritage. Elias Vance leaned back in his pilot's chair, the worn material groaning in protest. He had flown to the edge of the galaxy to lose himself in grief. He had thought his story was over. But here in the hidden heart of a nebula, watching a girl be reunited with her lost people, he realized it wasn't. He hadn't just saved her. In some small, profound way, she had saved him too. The ghosts of his past were still with him, but now they didn't feel so heavy. They felt proud. And as the Sylvan ship guided his broken freighter toward a haven of light, Elias Vance, the lonely prospector, allowed himself a small, weary smile. He was a long way from human space, but for the first time in a very long time, he felt like he had found his way home. Elias Vance, a man who fled to the darkest corners of the galaxy to escape his own pain, found his purpose in the eyes of a lost child. He stood against an unimaginable evil, not with an arsenal of weapons, but with a core of human decency he thought he had lost forever. Lyra, who carried the memory of 1 billion deaths etched into her skin, found her way back to the light, proving that even after the most profound darkness, hope can be reborn. Their journey is a testament to the fact that the greatest force in the universe isn't a warship or an empire, but the simple, unyielding power of compassion. One choice, one act of kindness. It can change the fate of a person, and perhaps even the stars themselves. What did you think of Elias's choice? Would you have done the same? Let us know in the comments below. If this story moved, you please hit that like button, share it with someone who loves epic sci-fi, and make sure you subscribe and ring that bell. We have so many more stories from the void to share with you, and you won't want to miss a single one. Thank you for listening.